Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. Hey, health junkies. On this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing Adi Wyshogrod, and she and I are going to be talking about nutrition and the benefits of a telehealth-based nutrition company for your nutrition needs. Now, here's the thing. Adi is a registered dietetic nutrition. She is also an LDN, so a licensed dietetic nutritionist. She's the co-founder and chief operating officer of Everlong, the national telehealth nutrition company, helping people transform their relationship with food. Now, the biggest thing about these guys, they are transforming that relationship with a behavior-first approach. This is something that a lot of programs overlook. They'll give you macros and then they'll be like, here, follow this and let's see how it goes. If any of you out there have just tried macros and not looked at your behavior and your connection to food, you're probably thinking right now, yes, I didn't have great success with just the macros. Because let's face it, as women in particular, we've got some interesting relationships with food. I'm calling myself out on this one. I've struggled for years with overeating. I've struggled with stress eating. And really, the macros didn't help me in that case because I would tweak the macros to be able to fit in my little stress situations where I would stress eat and then I'd be like, well, I just won't eat dinner because I just ate a whole bunch of macadamia nuts and chocolate chips. Hacking your nutrition is so much about looking at the behavioral aspect of things. Now, Adi has a decade of experience, actually over a decade of experience, and she's really looking at how people actually live, not what they eat. And this is so huge because her dietitians support patients in building a personalized habit free from guilt, restriction, or even diet rules. Because let's face it, these things do not reflect real life. And the coolest part about our program is if you have insurance, their sessions are covered at 100% for 95% of patients, which is fascinating. And she and I go into like how many visits do people on average get, and it's mind-blowing here. So Everlong is a accessible, judgment-free nutrition company that supports people to heal their relationship with food. And really, not only do they work with eating disorders, because we think about behavior and we think about that connected to eating disorders, but actually they work on sports nutrition. They also work with eating like around having celiacs and eating around autoimmune conditions and what to do and how to help with your behavioral situation in this case. Because I think for a lot of people, when we've been diagnosed with chronic health conditions, we don't know necessarily, one, what to eat, or if our relationship with food is impacting this as well. And so many fascinating things we talk about here in the podcast about how her Everlong program works and how they are impacting folks' lives through working through the behavior approach first. So cool. So let's introduce you to Adi Wyshogrod. Adi Wyshogrod, welcome to the Health Fix podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to dive in.
Well, when I saw that you are the co-founder of a telehealth behavioral nutrition company, I was like, yes, please, we need this. We need this more than ever because, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of people are turning to the GLP-1s. And with that comes no behavioral change unless you're specifically working with a group that does that. And I think we're going to be heading into a realm where a lot of people are going to realize that if they didn't get their changes happening with their behavior around food, weight's going to come right back on. I'm sure you probably thought about that.
Yeah, we do see a large population of patients that are on GLP-1s, and that's a big angle we take. We work with you in that realm, not against you. I think that's the common misconception of, they're going to tell me not to do this. Really, Our goal is to make sure that you have the nutrients you need, you feel good, and you're working for those long-term changes. So definitely a big piece we're seeing even more and more now with the patients on GLP-1.
It's such a thing. It's such a thing and so important to have this. Now, of course, what brought me to you as well as I saw you guys take lots of different insurances. What brought you to starting Everlong? And of course, we're going to ask what's in the name and all that. But what brought you to starting and offering to insurance when a lot of folks are going into the realm of offering private nutrition and different programs of that nature?
Yeah, definitely. So obviously I'm a registered dietitian. So Everlong started when I had my solo practice. So I've been in the field for around 10 years, and I started working with patients one-on-one right away, but wasn't insurance for a while. And I was kind of in and out of seeing patients. And then Everlong, as it is today, I just kind of started expanding, seeing patients. There's a need for this in different states. So I first started taking insurance, and then I started bringing on my first few providers, and it really just grew from there. The piece where, we have the behavioral piece and the clinical piece that we tie, that really stemmed from just, I've always been interested in psychology and nutrition. I've always counseled that way, where we focus on the behavioral piece, the habits, but not everybody does, and dietitians are not trained in that. And so when I started seeing there's this huge gap, the whole company went through like a rebrand where we, brought on providers that were trained in these specific modalities, that had backgrounds working in behavioral health and mental health and eating disorders. And we shifted this way just because there is such a need and a gap in the dietetics profession and industry. And that's really where Everlong, as it is today, was born, out of that need of, okay, there's tons of clinical dietitians, but nobody's addressing this root cause of behavior and habits. And that's really what drives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's definitely fills a space for doctors that, it's not our specialty, and we need help outside of the realm of what we can do. And, when I saw the comprehensive behavioral work you guys teach, I'm like, oh, this is so huge. What's kind of been found in your guys' group to help, like, in terms of setting a plan for behavioral intervention? What's kind of been, just to give folks an idea of how often they may need to, meet up with someone, what's kind of a traditional way that you've seen the best success?
Yeah, so we actually work with patients more of like a therapeutic approach. And so a lot of the time it sounds like, or people describe it as therapy. Like if you read some of what people say on reviews, it's like, oh, this has literally changed my life. This is like therapy. And so we meet with patients on a weekly basis, and that was driven from research about how many touch points or sessions does it take to truly start seeing change that will lead to long-term change, right? Not just like a quick fix or, one session and you don't meet with them 3 months later, which is very traditional of clinical dietetics, right? You see someone in an outpatient setting and then, they're booked, 2, 3, 4 months out, and you only meet for 20 minutes. So the whole company is designed around that. And then also there's a lot of research that shows that when you're trying to make behavioral changes, especially with nutrition, I mean, it's such a large component of our lives, right? We eat every day. Those touch points help people be more successful even between sessions, right? So just the accountability, knowing you have that appointment coming up, and then also, the patients can monitor, track, their hunger, fullness, how they're feeling between meals. And the portal we use. And so it is really more of like a therapeutic journey, knowing you have that person to hold you accountable and be your support system, rather than, this dietitian barely knows me. We really get to know our patients truly on like a personal level.
Nice. That's important. And that's kind of why I asked, because that has, it's also been the state of healthcare where it is, where folks will be waiting 6-8 weeks, and it's like, oh my goodness, between visits and in that time, no access to questions, no access to being able to ask, what do I do? It sounds like you've got a portal system, like you said, where you can track things. Can folks also troubleshoot a little bit with their dietitian as well?
Yeah. So are you asking, like, can they touch base with their dietitian between sessions?
Yes.
Yeah. So our dietitians, they definitely can, they can shoot them an email, they can shoot them a chat, and if they have a question. A lot of times if people are like, hey, I'm at the grocery store, like, I found this, what do you think? Or like, here's my symptoms I found, and like, what do you think of this? And the dietitian can see what they're logging. If it's like a GI, someone with GI struggles that's posting how they're feeling in between meals, whatever it is, they can go over that together. So it's really neat. You can say, oh, this is what happened, the last couple of days, and let me pull it up and let's talk about it on the session. And because, they have a full 55 minutes together on each session, it's plenty of time to dive in to the nutrition piece, and then let's talk about why you felt this way or why these things are happening from the behavioral piece.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So a lot of, my listeners are between 35 and 55, and they're going through perimenopause and menopause, and at this time of life, there's some changes, but it's also like a big, like, I got to deal with my stuff, right? And There's weight issues that come, with hormone shifts and whatnot. And so a lot of women are really, really struggling with the psychology aspect, what to do and how to let go, and also conflicting advice
Yeah.
on social media as to what to do. Give us a little background in terms of how you guys are working with women in this particular space, and some of the, if you have a client story or whatever, how give us a little sense of like if someone between 35 and 55 stepped in and maybe they're experiencing hormonal shifts and they're trying to figure out, why is my weight going up? What can I do about it? How would it look to just step in and visit with you guys?
Yeah, so that is actually like an age range, kind of the most common age range. We're usually working with people, I would say like 25, 30 to 45, 50. We work with a lot of women, and what would happen is, usually women in that situation are coming in, like you mentioned, they're struggling, they're not feeling great, they're struggling with weight gain, they don't really know what's going on, and then there's that emotional piece of, depending if they've had a lifelong struggle with dieting, right, chronic dieting, or maybe they have a condition, they're not getting the proper support from their healthcare team. That's common. So we come in, and I don't want to say we're not investigators or we're working with you, but we come in, and from the beginning of your intake, we're diving into everything. What's your, history with nutrition and dieting? What's your history with any trauma? Tell us about your relationship with food from when you were little. Tell us about your relationship with food now. Do you have a partner? Like, what does your life look like on all fronts? We really take this holistic approach. I think the word holistic tends to be thrown around. Like, what does that mean? In our sense, it's taking into account that every decision you make around your life and food is for a reason, right? It's not a lack of discipline. It's, you may be busy, you may be working 8 hours a week, you have a family, whatever's going on. So we personalize the approach to every specific person. We don't have like a one size fits all plan. Not every provider is working with the same background and perspective. And so when you come in, we have that intake dive in, and then we start saying, where can we start? What's the lowest hanging fruit? What do you feel is doable right now? Just because you come work with us doesn't mean you have the capacity to change everything in your life, right? So it's, what are those baby steps that we can take to help you move forward and feel better, or boost a little bit of confidence, or really try to understand, why am I doing these things I'm doing? Why are my habits this way? And then that's where each week you're kind of, so I was saying it's a little bit of investigation, like you're kind of diving into what happened this week, how did things go, what did you struggle with, how are you feeling after a month working together, how are you feeling after 2 months? And then from there, we kind of keep tweaking our intervention and treatment plan based on how you're feeling.
Makes sense. Makes sense. When I look at behavioral change, this is obviously at the root of all weight, if we're talking weight issues, or if we're talking even, and I'm a naturopath, so I'm going to put my opinion in here, is that why we end up with certain conditions happening, right? But also the side of it's the nervous system and nervous system regulation, and sometimes we'll use food for that, sometimes comfort food versus other things. What do you feel like, if we're looking at behavioral change and say someone's on the fence of, do I really need help, what would you say that could be some clues that behavior is intervening here, and that it might be something that needs a little bit of support? If someone's just, thinking, I don't know, do I need this? Do I not?
The biggest thing I would say is history and like cycles of what's going on. So if you are someone that, says you're going to make changes, honestly, in any aspect of your life, because when someone says, oh, I want to get a promotion, I want to change my job, all those things come down to, how do you feel about yourself? How do you show up? Do you have energy to do the things you want to do? Like we have, people come to us and their outcome might be 6 months later, oh my gosh, these things in my life changed that I didn't even think were related, right? And so it's the cycles of, where do you want to be if you think you don't need support? Are you where you want to be in different aspects of your life? And are you repeating cycles, like saying, I'm going to do the annual New Year's, right? Like, I'm going to change this year, or saying, I'm not going to do this diet, but then we get pulled because we're so used to being this cycle to do it. And not just a diet, just anything, right? Like committing to exercising more days a week than is feasible for you. I think if you're somebody that kind of tells yourself the same stories and you recognize the same cycles, then, and it's really hard to, pull the trigger and make change because it's hard to put the effort in to work on ourselves, but we try to make it easier by meeting you where you're at and saying you don't have to fix everything at once. Just start, come and take that hour for yourself a week. And if you get nothing else from it, at least it's an hour where you're focusing on yourself, and then we can focus on the behavior change next once you feel more comfortable and ready to do so.
That makes sense. One of the things you brought up was time. And I think time is a huge objection that people have to making change. I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to think it out. Another big one is I don't have time to meal prep. How do you guys, or how would you work with that in specifics, just to kind of help folks see a little bit of like, maybe it's not as much effort and time as you're thinking?
Yeah, I think personally, I have always been like, I've always worked with my patients like this, that what is the easiest kind of like lowest hanging fruit that we can do that takes least amount of time? Because I don't like spend a lot of time cooking. I don't like spend a lot of time on these things, right? I'm like, okay, what do I actually enjoy that I'm going to do for exercise and food? So the biggest thing is kind of what I was saying before of not the expectations. It's huge with anything you do with nutrition and health. What's the expectation? Are you setting yourself up to be successful or not by telling yourself you're going to make all these changes? So I think if somebody's really struggling with time, or they can't even imagine adding something else to their plate, which I would think is most people, just think one small change can make a difference. Focus on one meal, one snack, one walk a week, whatever that goal is. One night where you go to bed a little earlier, you shut your phone off. Those things can compound. And so I think that's what stops most people from really focusing on their health, is that the all or nothing mindset and like setting proper expectations, especially in different stages of our lives. Like sometimes you're in that point in your life where you have the time and effort and energy to dedicate, and other times you don't. And so we see that when we work with patients, is like sometimes there's seasons where people are really gung-ho and have the time, and then they're not, and that's fine. And we just kind of ebb and flow with them and change the goals and the treatment plan based on where they're at.
That makes sense. And I think that's such an important topic because, I'll have women come to me and while I'm not doing nutrition counseling or any of that, the GLP-1s are things that I do prescribe if indicated. And people are like, I need to just lose 10 pounds and I need to have it off in like a month. And you're like, okay, all right. And then you're like, what are you doing? And there's a lot of, what are you doing to make some interventions? And then it becomes this thing where, is it enough that I can bite off
Right.
all of the different things that I want to do and do it? And so it sounds like you guys help quite a bit with like prioritizing and organizing how to set up your intervention.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where, like you mentioned, the expectation piece is huge, because even with a GLP-1, right, it's a tool, it's there to support you, but setting the expectation of what else can you do around it. And then also with the too, there's a lot of, it is really both. It's like nutrition and making sure you're getting adequate nutrition, you're hydrated, you feel good. And then there's the behavior piece. And so, I think a perfect conversation there. We work with a lot of doctors, providers that have, medical weight management programs, and we do come in and do the behavior piece. It's setting the expectation or having that conversation right up front of, okay, what is realistic and what is healthy and, advised, and back to, long-term change. It always is coming back to like, why do something that's not going to last? That's a lot of time and effort, and that cycle continues. And when the cycle continues, it's harder to break the longer it goes on. So I think, this is kind of a theme, right? Like everything ties with like not having the all or nothing mindset, and really truly in learning and leaning into just making small changes that add up in time. Even on a GLP-1, right? Like that, if you have it as a tool, like the goal is to be able to keep that weight off and like really learn those habits for when you're weaning off of it.
So huge. And I think that's probably where, we need a lot of support right now in that realm, because I'm seeing people get the results, seeing them lose the weight, but I'm also seeing them tell me like, yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to eat when I get done because I'm not hungry. I'm not eating. But then when the food noise comes back, what do we do here?
It's overwhelming. Yeah.
Right. And so food noise being one of the big topics, and behavioral health around food topics. So not food topics, but food noise.
Yeah.
What kind of things do you tend to work with your patients on when it comes to the voices in the head being like, oh, it's just one bite. Oh, look at those cookies over at Crumble. It's right down the street. I'm going to go over there. How do you work on those kind of things? What kind of things can we give folks an example of what might be some behavioral interventions there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing is creating that awareness of when is that happening, how frequently is that happening, and how is it impacting you? How are you feeling around those decisions? And that usually starts with keeping some sort of a food log, or we call it like a food and mood journal, because you can't really make changes without being aware. So people can sometimes be aware that it's happening, or they just feel like it's all they think about is food and have that food noise, but how else is it impacting you, and what are those internal things you're saying to yourself around what's happening? So we kind of start with that, and it does touch a little bit into some of those counseling skills, right, of like cognitive behavioral therapy, and really learning how your thoughts around that are impacting you. So from there, when you create that awareness, a lot of things we might do is maybe use like a hunger fullness scale and teach what does that mean, and how do I listen to my hunger and fullness cues, and then also figuring out what is behind some of the food noise. Like when you're thinking about food, when you're turning to food, what are those emotions going through your head? What's going on, and what's the backstory behind it, and diving into, is there trauma, history, relationship with food. So when we collect all that and kind of start with those interventions of keeping a food journal and then creating that awareness and saying, okay, now we know that there's a link between you stopping on your way home and this meeting on Tuesdays. Maybe it's linked to a really high level of stress in that meeting, or maybe you're not in a happy relationship and so you're struggling at home with that. And there's always an underlying piece. Humans, we're not just not disciplined and like we should be doing better. There's always a cycle. Like habits are built, out of cycles. When you get up and you brush your teeth, like that's a habit. When you tie your shoes, that's a habit. And so these are things that are deeply ingrained. What we're doing is we're kind of taking these habits and like dissecting them and saying, where do they come from? And then slowly beginning to change those habits and rebuild those thoughts and those feelings around food, and turning to other things, right? So we might recommend mindfulness techniques, hobbies, like different things that you can get, or additional support. If it's like if we think you want to work with somebody from a therapy standpoint and us, right, it complements each other nicely. And so I think that just kind of building that care team and that support system for you, and that's where it takes time. It's not something you can get a lot of progress in 30 days in terms of creating this awareness, but you're not going to change years of habits in such a short period of time. So really being like dedicated to it, but knowing you can make small changes at a time.
So important to know that it's going to take time and you can make small changes, because I think, back to the thing I've already mentioned before, like we are looking, unfortunately, because of society, we look for quick fixes. And I think for many people, that's where we've gotten into that loop of like, well, I'll just take the diet pills, right? Or I'll just take, GLP-1s or something of that nature. It sounds like I'm hating on them, but it's really not that. It's just the thinking I'm trying to put out there of not thinking that they're going to solve all of the issues. Now, when it comes up, one of the interesting things I noticed is that you also have sports nutrition in there. And I think for a lot of folks, if we weren't an athlete, and even then, high school athletics for me were like, for swim team, it was like binge on pasta the Friday night before the Saturday, meet. And that was the extent of like nutrition for high school athletes. And so I think for a lot of folks, we also are kind of confused as to like, all right, now, I'm actually wanting to be more fit. Maybe I want to train for marathons or something of that nature. How does that take into, if someone is looking for something like that? Tell us a little bit about how that's different from working on, say, someone wanting to work on weight loss or a eating disorder type of situation.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think what's important that you just highlighted is that nutrition counseling and nutrition, just as I mentioned, we eat every day. It's such a big part of our lives. You don't need to have some huge thing to work on or a chronic condition. Absolutely, we all need some support. Like I've worked with dietitians on and off myself just because I want support, or I like to learn from them, or I like to kind of work on focusing on specific pieces of my nutrition at different points in my life. And so somebody that comes in with sports nutrition, like wanting to learn about sports nutrition, or struggling, for a marathon training or whatever it is, or just healthy general nutrition, we have that as an option. So you don't need to feel like, I'm quote unquote normal around food. Like, do I need to come and get support? As a dietitian myself, like I just said, I work with one. I think there's absolutely, we can all get support. It doesn't need to be on this, oh, I have something I'm diagnosed with. So we do actually have a lot of people that come in and say, I'm training for something, or I just reached a goal and now I want to work on the sports nutrition piece. And that's completely fine. I mean, I think that there's still a lot of parallels, like you still have habits you have to build around it, but maybe it's a little bit less like intense of sessions, if I can say that. But there's still, of course, things that we can help with, and it's great because then you're focusing on your nutrients. You're going to feel better around your workouts or whatever you're, coming to see us for.
And I love that you highlighted that, because that's kind of what I was thinking. Sports nutrition is kind of like, fitness, longevity, nutrition, whatever you want to call it, because we don't necessarily need to see a dietitian because there's a problem.
Right.
It's good to just kind of go in and be like, all right, am I creating balanced meals for my body? Is this working? Now, of course, a lot of people right now, there's debates on fasting. There's debates on, one meal a day situation fasting. There's debates on macros. Do you do them? Do you not? How do you guys approach that? Like, what's the take there? Because I think a lot of people are going to ask me, well, is it just a macros based program? Can I plug it in like Zoom and go along?
Yeah. So the big piece of when someone comes in, we're meeting them where they're at. So from like a behavior change approach, we work on interventions and treatment plans that are not so restricted or numbers based. We really focus on kind of getting somebody away from that, especially if it's triggering, if they have a past of disordered eating. Numbers and focusing on, food logging and stuff is definitely something that we would absolutely, stay away from. However, we're meeting you where you're at. So if you come in and you say, I've been doing this and this is working for me, I've been doing this and I find that I like, this piece of it. Okay, amazing. Now we have that information. Everything's just data, right? Saying that you struggle with being on a macro plan or a diet. Now we're taking the data and we're saying, okay, what part of it are you struggling with? What part of it is actually, do you feel like is working for you? If you're somebody that works well with structure, let's build structure that maybe isn't as rigid as feeling like you have to track everything. But the nice thing is when you have so much time to meet with someone and really get to know them and you do such a thorough and deep intake, you can pull those pieces out and say, okay, we're not coming in and telling you to stop everything you're doing. We're not telling you what you're doing is wrong. Everyone has their truth with why something works for them or why something doesn't work for them, and we're going to unpack that and then provide the recommendations based on like what works for you. We're all different. Some of us do well with structure and have routine and some don't. And so how can we figure out what's going to work for you long term? Because what works for you isn't going to work for me and the next person. And so that's where I think it is important to highlight that you brought that up, because it's, we're all different. It would be silly if we said here, everybody does this, which historically with diets is kind of what, you're buying something that's for everyone, right? It's not a one size fits all.
That's what I was wondering. Because if you look at different individual providers out there who are doing their nutrition programs, they have their program. And their program has the same, like, this is what we found to work. We're going to do it this way. And I really like the flexibility to meet someone where they're at and be able to adjust accordingly. Now, when it comes to condition-specific eating, and one of the biggies that I know a lot of people will struggle with is if they're first diagnosed with celiac. Yeah. And they're going, my whole world is wheat. What do I do? How do I do this? Right. Let's talk about condition-specific types of situations. You even described before we hit record how you guys were just learning about a new condition that you didn't have training on, so you guys are getting trained up on that. What kind of things does someone want to take into consideration when they've just been diagnosed or they have a certain autoimmune condition or something of that nature, and they're trying to find a solution for themselves?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that in a situation like that is usually they are not, in a celiac situation, maybe somebody's brought up nutrition and dietetics and saying, go see a dietitian, go see somebody that can help with this. But I think it's finding the right support, because like you said, it really can change, your whole life, and you're stuck. You don't know what to do, especially if somebody's newly diagnosed, even with diabetes or something. There are a lot of great doctors that will recommend nutrition, but we have a lot of people that come to us and say, I was just diagnosed with XYZ and I don't know where to turn. And, I was just speaking to a woman recently who has kidney disease. She said she has never been recommended a dietitian, like an outpatient dietitian, to work with ever. And I was shocked. I couldn't even believe that she said that, and she couldn't believe that this exists. And so I think that finding support and doing it's like unfortunate because you kind of have to be your own support system or kind of your own, kind of like in the word, like rally for yourself. You have to be the one that kind of seeks it out because your providers won't always tell you, and maybe they don't have enough nutrition training, or they don't know, or they don't know where to turn to give you those resources. But I do think finding support, a group, dietitian, whether it's a group online or a group in your area. And I do think what people don't know is like the insurance piece, right? Is, oh my gosh, you just got diagnosed with this. How would I ever afford a dietitian? But with the insurance piece, that's all covered, right? And so we haven't even, diving into that. But I think just knowing that that is a resource for you is really important. And then you don't have to do it alone, because then you're figuring out, you and your dietitian are figuring out together how you're going to navigate it. You're not, going into your kitchen and figuring it out alone.
Well, and that's what so many people do, especially with kidney disease. I mean, there's so much confusion there. Diabetes too. And unfortunately, social media doesn't help because there's do this, do that, there's, and then next thing you know, you do nothing because you don't know which one's right for you. So, it's a huge confusion space. And this is why what you're doing is so valuable. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about insurance because, a lot of folks will be like, oh, maybe I can use my insurance. And by the way, guys, you go to their website, you'll know, when you go into the booking process, even before you can book, you can see if insurance is going to cover. But tell us a little bit about like what does insurance usually, like on average, because I know plans are different, but how many visits on average will they cover for how long amount of time for folks?
Yeah, so with every plan, every plan is different, and it's kind of, that might be like an obvious statement, but what's even crazy with insurance is that within, one plan, there's sometimes different tiers that cover different things. However, with our services, with nutrition counseling, it falls under preventative benefits, and those are covered and bypass the deductible and copay in almost all instances. So patients are like it's over 95% of our patients that have insurance that they want to use for our services are 100% covered. So there is actually $0 of patient responsibility. And most plans, because of this, it's based on medical necessity. They won't cap it. Some plans may cap it, and that's something we will know. But that is usually enough sessions to be seen for half a year or a year. There's, here and there, like you said, there's a couple of plans that maybe they'll cap, 10 sessions or something like that, but it's very rare. And that's where when you go on our site, you can see, right away, oh, you'll have coverage for this. But because of those preventive benefits, nutrition counseling coverage has just greatly expanded, especially, even before COVID, but especially since after COVID. And I think it's a benefit that most people don't know they have. I think most HR people don't even know that their employees have it. Most gym owners don't even know that this is a thing. So it's still being shared, and people still don't know about it. This is kind of like a baby thing that's growing, that people are like, oh wow, this is actually a thing covered by my plan that I'm already paying for.
So huge. And what about folks that have chosen to, get minimal insurance or catastrophic insurance? What can they do? I'm guessing you guys also have cash prices and different things there, packages.
Yeah, so we do have cash prices. It all works the same online. Like you can go and click just like, self-pay. And then we also can accept like health savings and flex savings accounts. So sometimes people, will have that from a past job or a current job and they don't choose to use insurance. So that kind of works the same way. That doesn't change the booking process at all. You can still get scheduled in just a couple minutes and select that. But we do have that as an option. And we're actually always working on expanding coverage. We do take Medicare. We're working on expanding into additional like state specific plans too, right? To just increase the access. So it's kind of something that our team's always working on, like, where is there a need or a gap that we can fill? And then if we're able to, get those contracts, we will.
Awesome. That's really neat. That's really neat that you guys are doing that. And, I think for a lot of people, one of the big coverage questions, like you already answered is how much time, how, what might be my out of pocket and things of that nature. Even the cash pay is awesome that you allow that, because some places will not allow cash pay if they do insurance. That's weird.
Yeah.
Now, with all of these, of course, folks are going to be thinking, do I need a referral? Do I need my doc to send up a referral? Is that a thing?
No, it's not a thing. So you
Cool.
actually don't need a referral. There's some plans, a couple, and for the most part, no. So you can go on, book, don't need a referral, don't need to talk to anyone. We only will ask for a referral. So Medicare needs a referral. But, if that's not really, if most people listening are not, having Medicare benefits, it's not really relevant. The times that you'll need a referral are some HMO plans will need a referral. And then there's a couple like state specific plans that need referrals, but especially, PPO plans don't need referrals. Some HMO plans, you just have your doctor put something in or we ask for it, but the barrier to trying is extremely low, right? You could just go on, book, work confirming your benefits in real time online, and then you don't need a referral. And if you do, we'll reach out before your session, but it's so few and far between that I would probably guess like under 1% of people that we work with, we actually need to touch base with them to get a referral. It's very low.
Nice. And do you guys communicate with people's providers? Like, say someone's referred over, because I saw the refer a patient button, someone's referred over because maybe they have a lot of like food sensitivities and you're working on their gut, but they're not eating, they just need some support in eating clean and things of that nature. Would that be a referral that someone could send in to and collaborate a little bit with?
Yeah, absolutely. So we share like notes and updates and treatment plans with providers. And then we also, our dietitians do work a lot with patients' therapists. So they'll collaborate, they'll have a check and call, or they'll email back and forth if there's any questions. And so we absolutely, we're big on collaboration of care. And it also is something that I think most providers care about this, but dietitians specifically, it's like, if we're trying to figure out what's going on, it's really, really helpful for us to have labs, to have, if you did genetic testing, whatever you did, if you have a GI doctor you're working with, if it's whether it's eating disorders or not, connecting with a therapist, but specifically if somebody's struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder and they are seeing a therapist, all of those things are just going to help us craft a better treatment plan for you and be on the same page. So that's kind of going back to the time thing. If you're seeing two providers, but you're working on similar things with those providers, they're actually, now you're getting double support. You're not, this person's, I got to do this homework for this provider and this homework for another, right? They work together where this week between my GI doctor, my therapist, and my dietitian, I'm working on this. And that's where it can work really, really nicely together.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. And that's wonderful to hear, as a provider who struggles and to find nutritionists that you can get in with, and refer my folks to, especially ones that take insurance. And I think this is something that a lot of providers struggle with. And I think, those of you who are kind of going like, man, maybe I could benefit from some nutrition visits. This is why sometimes we don't have referrals for you. And this is a great situation to work into. And because it's all telehealth, so folks can do this from the comfort of their home. They can pop in, on breaks or whatever they need to do. So all that being said, we've kind of went into some of the minutia. And I know that, for some folks, they're like, okay, that's great. Give us the details. I am very curious as to your business name, Everlong. Where did it come from? How did you guys develop it? Since you are a co-founder, I'm super curious about that and giving us a little details on your background of what brought you to become a nutritionist in the first place.
Yeah, so Everlong, it's funny, it was actually the name before it turned to we dropped it was Everlong Nutrition. So we dropped the nutrition and then it's just Everlong. I think really even what's kind of interesting about the name is even before we transitioned to this, behavioral nutrition piece or focus as a company, Everlong is kind of like, the word, or just when you think about it, it's something that keeps going, right? It's almost like evergreen, right? It's going to remain and it's going to be, I say sustainable, but I think that's where Everlong Nutrition stemmed from. And then we dropped the nutrition, and I think just having, the simplicity of the one word and just kind of, it's a more powerful, right, without the nutrition. And then for me, so I actually became a dietitian after I struggled with my own nutrition and weight goals when I was little. So I think I saw my first dietitian, I want to say I was 12 or 14. And I remember I would go in, my mom would bring me in and we talked about I don't know, probably like healthy snacks as a kid, or like what do you eat after school, or like how do you move your body. And I remember specifically, I just got, I went through like a big weight loss journey. And I remember learning just how to eat. I grew up in a household that eats pretty healthy. My mom cooked, like we had pretty, good variety of foods in the house. But I was an overeater and I was an emotional eater. And so I struggled with that forever. I mean, it's still something, it doesn't go away. You just kind of learn the skills and the tools to, change those behaviors and habits and be aware of it. And so when I went to college and I studied nutrition, I was always looking for like, where's the psychology? Like we take a psychology class here, it's like Psych 101. It's not really like the deep psychology class. I'm always looking for like, where I want to learn about cravings and habits and like why we're eating this way. And I remember I wanted to double major in psychology, and like now years later I see why, like I see this intersection. So it's kind of always like subconsciously I was interested in it, and I'm like, oh, now I get it, like duh, of course they're related. But I think that's where it stemmed from. And so naturally when I started counseling, I would teach myself these different skills, and I was just counseling patients that way. It wasn't like, let's just talk about food. It was, what's going on? What are your feelings? In another life, I would do therapy, right? It's like because of that blend, I'm so interested. And I actually have a lot of psychologists in my family, like immediate and extended family. And so I think there's just this innate interest of that. And so blending the two between like my struggles with nutrition and then the psychology, that's, where it stems. And I still get like so excited. We'll do like trainings. I'm like, oh, I want to watch this training like the team's doing, it's like on psych or like why we eat the way we do. And I just think it's really fascinating. And I think more people are, like you said, kind of moving in that direction of understanding the behavioral piece, but we have a long way to go.
Absolutely. We absolutely do. Thanks for sharing your story. It's, it's incredibly relatable when we realize that like it's more than just the foods that we're putting in our body, because so many women will come and say, doc, I'm eating all the right things, but my weight won't come off. And I've learned this with my own journey of overeating and stress eating, that you can eat the good things, but if you're part squirrel, as I joke that I am, macadamia nuts kind of build up over time. And, I love them buggers, but boy, you eat a whole bag of those and you've done a lot of good, dense nutrition stacking right there. So it's a matter of looking at it in a different perspective and looking at those behaviors. And that's really what I've found over time, that, unfortunately, a lot of folks will go to a regular dietitian that's maybe in a hospital setting or a clinical setting, and you get the like, here's your macros, have a great day. It's never worked on my end. That's why things like Noom and like the other things have not worked, because of needing to get to the bottom of things. And of course, that's why I wanted to bring you on, because of the behavioral aspect of it, because that is the root of it. Absolutely. So, oh my gosh, such good stuff. Let's tell folks how to find you, because the website's a little different than the business name. So Get Everlong, correct?
Yes, geteverlong.com. Everlong, like the Foo Fighters name song, is a good way to remember it. That tends to come up. So just geteverlong.com. And when you go to the site, you can get started, you can confirm your coverage, and everything is verified before you book. The whole process takes like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. It's really quick and easy. And, you can read a little bit about like the conditions we see on there as well.
Excellent. And are you guys on social media at all, like Instagram or Facebook or any of those things, so folks can kind of see what you're up to behind the scenes?
Yeah, so it's actually Get Everlong with an underscore on TikTok and on Instagram.
Excellent. So you guys can check that out there too. And of course, I'll have all of this in my podcast notes at drjkrausend.com. And gosh, such good stuff. I'm really excited to be able to refer folks to you guys, because this is great to go along. Of course, I'm more virtual now, so having more of a telehealth based, nutrition programs that we can send to, but also just because of all the insurance, it's helpful, because people do want to use their insurance, and this is a great use of it. Gosh, Adi, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Hey, Health Junkies, before you go, I want to tell you a little bit about something. If you are watching this on YouTube, you probably saw me drinking a pink drink while recording the podcast. Well, that is from my sponsor, Foria Wellness. They are the makers of Mellow. These are magnesium super blends that help with feeling more chill. And hey, let's face it, this day and age, sometimes with all the things going around, we need a little more chill. This is 300 milligrams of magnesium in a pretty powder that tastes mildly sweet, nothing overpowering. It also has L-theanine and GABA. These are things that help calm our nervous system. And if I could tell you anything about the body, if we have a dysregulated nervous system that's on fight or flight mode all the time, we're not as productive as we could possibly be, and we're not as centered, focused, and grounded as we could possibly be. So this can just help you out to get there. So check out Foria Wellness's magnesium super blends and see what you think. There's a couple of them. This pink one here is the pomegranate. There's a purple one that's lavender berry. And then there's one that's called Naked that is just plain, and you could throw it into smoothies. But hey, let's face it, plain magnesium powder isn't as tasty, and I'm always looking for something that's pretty and tastes good too. So if you're looking for a little bit of support when it comes to helping your nervous system get in a parasympathetic chill state, Mellow from Foria Wellness is something to look into. All right, have a great day, whatever you're doing. Hey fellow health junkie, thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that word out. Thanks again for listening.